Yes, Honourable Mr. Chair. This is a very important bill that definitely is making some improvements on a 3-year boondoggle, coming up on 3 years of this government, failing to understand property rights, failing to recognize the needs of protecting property here in Alberta, and wanting to move it into cabinet and just saying, trust me. And Mr. Chair, we need to continue discussing what different aspects we can try and finish fixing this bill. And like I say, it's very encouraging that the government has taken these first 3 steps. First one being that when a land has been designated as an area, that property owners can actually trigger the sale of that land, realizing that, and it's been brought up by the government that there are times where if you can hold, the land value will go up. But there's also an economic opportunity, and if you're in a type of business and you need to grow and it's been frozen, that definitely, Mr. Chair, causes some problems in the fact that I've met several people that their property have been frozen and they haven't been able to develop, and they feel that they're not going to be fairly compensated, and they haven't been able to go through an appeal process, and it's been extremely frustrating for them and caused a lot of strain on their business and their family. The other one that's a huge improvement, and we're very appreciative of that, is the fact that a person can now, with this amendment, if this bill passes, say that, I'm not happy with the process that's gone through there, I want to go to the courts, and they can have their due process in the courts, and there the Expropriation Act takes over, and they can actually show that there is some value in their business and what it could be down future growth, and be compensated for that because of the freeze. And that truly is an important aspect, Mr. Chair. But there's a few other concerns with the bill that at this point has not really been addressed as well as we would like. And under Section 10 of the original bill allows the government to freeze the development of the property, and then by doing that they send out notification to those people who have interest in that land. And that interest often is held by the bank that has a mortgage on that. Okay, so this can talk. That's all I need to know. That when that notification goes out, and the bank can get kind of antsy, or the mortgage holder, and say that, we didn't realize that this is going to be taken away. And worse than that is that all of a sudden, if there's any problems, and especially these are to deal with environmental problems, that the bank or that mortgage holder could actually be held responsible for the activities or the problems that have taken place on that property. And the government has still failed to address this area, which we would very much like to see be addressed in a more appropriate way. But these areas, Mr. Chair, are a concern, and we keep going back to the real root of this problem, and it is the bill. The minister brought up some interesting points that, that historically the government has failed to plan. They need the Land Assembly Act, which I would agree with them that it would be much to the benefit of both society and the property owners to have an act that puts forward a process where the public need is in fact shown, that whether we need to store more water, and I think that that's something that could be perhaps one of the first and most important things that this Land Assembly Act should be looking at. Calgary only has one real reservoir. The water flow from the glaciers is going down, but yet the total amount of stream flow seems to be going up, but it's over a shorter and shorter period. And they've looked around the areas that where could they do some on-stream or off-stream storage, and that is the purpose of the Land Assembly Act, is to look at those type of public needs and then go through a process to get those lands to fulfill those needs. And it's one area, again, where this government for years, Mr. Chair, has failed to act. I think it was 1993 when the last time that we've built a structure, the Oldman River Dam, of any sizable amount to store water. And I know that there are many studies that the government has done in the past to look at places for on-stream storage and off-stream storage. And it's one of those things, Mr. Speaker, that this government is spending billions of dollars saying that we need to address the CO2 problem, rather than actually addressing the fact that the climate change that we're experiencing, what can we do to actually, I guess, mitigate those circumstances? And in the South, there's a complete freeze or a ban on any increased water allocations. They're fully allocated. Some areas up to 110% allocated. And the question is, you know, do we stop our growth, or do we realize that a huge percentage of our water is passing right through Alberta and heading out east, never to be utilized? This is a natural renewable resource that we should be doing a much better job of capturing that and enhancing our quality of life and industry and food production here in this province. I believe that it's 3% of the land, the arable land here in Alberta, produces 20% of the food. And that's the irrigated areas of this province. And I know there's many different areas that we've looked at and have possibilities of moving that water to be utilized, to be vertically integrated in producing, for processing. And it would be a huge benefit. That, I mean, when you look at Europe, it's interesting, you know, they still have vivid memories of the starvation, and we just had a ceremony in commemoration of Holodomor on Monday of the starvation in Europe, but that wasn't because of bad weather and not able to produce. That was, again, evil, corrupt government confiscating property from the people and going and trying to take that to destroy a region which the government was having difficulty controlling. And it's interesting that the education minister wants to ask if that's for real, when many of the acts that were taken in Europe during World War II and other times very much were brutal acts that didn't respect property rights. And there are many areas in these bills that have no respect for property rights. And so when you step down that trail, we can see the end results, and we don't want to go there, not even one step here in Alberta. But yet many government members seem to pride themselves on this and saying that we know best. We'll put it in Cabinet. Cabinet will make those decisions. And it's just wrong, Mr. Chair. That's the last place that we want those decisions to be made. What happens when Cabinet makes those decisions? They become political decisions. And political decisions are rarely in the interest of the people. They're usually more in the interest of a party and retaining and holding that power. And so we have this dilemma with Bill 19, the Land Assembly Act, which has come along. And now we're to Bill 23, trying to bring in these amendments, when in fact we should just restore all property rights. And again, they've asked many times, well, how do we do that? We go back to the Expropriation Act. Is there a role for a land assembly project? Yes. And I think Bill 23 is addressing that in a much better way than when they started. But it's taken over 2 years. Thousands and thousands of Albertans have gone to meetings. They've sent letters, they've made phone calls to their MLAs, and it wasn't until this new Premier came in that we finally have a bill that's even finally starting to recognize it, but yet to add the insult of bringing this bill, the Premier says, well, we're going to have a task force to study property rights, when in fact they've received the information multiple times over, and the people that have contacted our office in the Wild Rose have very much said that they're insulted that this government has created a task force at this point of individuals that have spoken out against any aspect of amendments, but yet these amendments have come forward. And so it is a little bit disappointing that they would like to go down that route and say that everything is okay. But Mr. Chair, we are disappointed, as Albertans are disappointed in this government, their lack of respect for property rights, and it's only when they finally receive so much heat from property owners and those who understand property throughout this province that they've brought forward this amendment. And it's too often, it's like the Hollywood shoplifter that when they're caught, they just want to say, oh, no, we didn't mean any of that. But the question is why did they ever do it? If they didn't mean it, why did they do it? Why did they defend it for 2 years and go around slandering such excellent citizens as Keith Wilson and saying that he's fear-mongering, doing it for personal interest, going after the land groups that have been fighting this adamantly and having meetings, taking a lot of time and energy, and yet just basically mocking them on their activities and saying that it's totally unnecessary. And yet then we get this bill coming in that is exactly addressing 3 of those concerns. One, that they can trigger the buyout, which is a huge improvement, and the people throughout the province are grateful for that. 2, that they can go through the due process of law. That is, again, it's so critical that is reinstated in here, that we are grateful that has come out in this new amendment. And it's just hard for me to understand how they wanted to bypass that for so long, to say that Cabinet can make that decision. You don't need to worry about us. Trust us. Oh, what is it, 50% of them, or what percentage say they own land over there? A high percentage of them, Mr. Chair, declare that we're landowners. You can trust us. But that's the last thing that I would want to do, is to trust them. What they are, they want to grab power and hang on to it, and they want to grab land in order to extend their dynasty in whatever way is possible, or more pathetically, is to be able to reward those with political connections. I still feel very strongly that PC stands more for political connections than anything about being progressive, and certainly nothing about being conservative. It's about their political connections, it's about power, it's about control. It's just a desperate act to try and change things without ever acknowledging that they were wrong. And that's probably the most disappointing point of all of this, is that nobody from the government has yet to get up and apologize to Mr. Wilson and thank him and saying, don't know how we didn't get this. I don't know why we took 2 years and put you through so much struggles to wake up Albertans to realize what was done, because this government continued to say day in and day out, we've done nothing wrong. This bill is there for the public good. You can count on it. We would never take your land without fairly compensating you. But yet they had no interest in what future opportunities were there. They had no problem with freezing land for 20 years and saying that, this is for the best interest of the people of Alberta, when it isn't. And this government has a long, bad track record of not respecting contracts that they don't want to. I remember when the last leadership contestants all said that what they really want to do is to review the royalty revenue, which in itself could be fair, Mr. Chairman, but what they didn't want to recognize or respect was the rule of law and those contracts that were signed. And they didn't say that, you know, starting in January 2009, when you bid on mineral leases, bid accordingly because this is what the new rate's going to be. What they did was say that we're going to go retroactive, and though you've bid on this land and you wanted to have the conditions, we're not going to respect those conditions. We're going to change those before we're going to do anything. We're not going to respect the rule of law. We're just going to simply enact this new. It's going to be retroactive, and though you bid with a formula that you thought that you were going to pay royalties on, we're changing that. Well, you can get up and talk for 2 minutes, then I'll go again. But anyways, I guess, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, what I'd like to do is to move an amendment, and so if we could take a minute to distribute it. Where are the 100 copies?
We shall
That's what I've been waiting for.
We shall pause a moment for the pages to distribute the amendment. We have distributed the amendment. The amendment is now known as A1. Honourable Minister of Education, you have some.
Mr. Chairman, before we get to the amendment, I would like to rise on a point of order under Section 23H of our standing orders, using language that entices. I believe it is a disorder in the House. The honourable member for Calgary, Glenmore, about 3 or 4 minutes ago in his comments has made a statement that I was hoping initially that I was mishearing, but then he repeated it several times. So without a possibility of denial, he said exactly what I think I heard he said, what I know he said. And he compared, Mr. Speaker, the Alberta government's land use policies, legislation, to the atrocities and genocide of Holodomor in Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, what he's doing is comparing our policies that we're passing in this legislature right now to Stalin's genocide during the 1920s in Ukraine, known as Holodomor, which killed somewhere between 6 and 10 million people. Mr. Speaker, if this isn't reaching a new bottom for the Wild Rose, I don't know what it is. This is disgusting, Mr. Speaker, because yesterday we were sitting in this chamber with ribbons and buttons on our lapels, and they were wearing them, supposedly feeling sorry for what happened, and today they're comparing that and trivializing that event. It's a very important historical event that killed thousands upon thousands, millions of people, many relatives of Albertans who live over here right now, and he compares those atrocities that Stalin put upon Europeans and Ukrainians to what's happening in this chamber right now. Mr. Speaker, that member should be ashamed of himself. He should apologize not only to this chamber, but to every person of Ukrainian heritage in this province and in this country. This is bloody shame.
On the point of order, Honourable Member for Airdrie Chestermere.
On the point of order. You know what? What this really shows is that there's a new. You can't call a point of order. Sit down,
hear the word
Finance
that came
Minister. If you can't follow the rules in here, sit down. Okay?
Point of order?
On the point of order, you can't call a point of order on a point of order, clearly. We know that's a clear rule. He doesn't understand it, everyone else
Okay,
does.
all right.
On
There's
the
a point of order. You're talking
Absolutely.
about Honourable Member, and then there's another point of order the
On the
Minister
point of order.
raised.
On the point of order. This minister, once again, has sunk to an absolute new low. It is absolutely amazing to me that a minister of the Crown would stand up and blurt out such absolute obscenities as I just heard. To try to paint this member of my caucus, of the Wild Rose Caucus, a member of this House, in such a disparaging light is despicable. He should be absolutely ashamed of himself. All this member was doing, all he was doing, was because of the incredible, we have these events at the legislature, these commemorations of things like the Holocaust and things like what happened during the atrocities in the Ukraine and so forth. We have these commemorations in order to remember these atrocities and make sure that they never happen again. Now, what this member was saying in that light was not saying that this government was interested in committing atrocities. He never once said that. Find it in the record. Where did he say that? He didn't say it. What he was saying is that it is absolutely imperative to a functioning democracy, absolutely imperative to a place that respects human rights, a government that respects human rights and will always uphold the rights of its citizens and protect them, to remember to protect things like property rights and to not trample on the rights of individuals. He was saying, and it's important, that's an important principle. And he wasn't accusing this group over here, obviously, of fitting into that category, of trampling over, of wanting to commit atrocities against his people. He was just saying we've got to be ever vigilant to make sure that when we pass laws, Mr. Chair, no matter what, that we think of the long-term effects of those laws. And the very first law, Bill 36, that was passed, for example, and Bill 19 is part of that, and Bill 50 and so on, but Bill 36 specifically gave the government the ability, under the law, it was completely unintended, I'm sure it was, but they clarified it, and they even clarified it in subsequent legislation, but gave them the right to take away people's land titles without compensation. Was it on purpose? I don't think it was. I would be willing to bet anything that sure was not their intent to take away people's land titles. Nonetheless, that's what was in the law. And so people like Keith Wilson and people like this honourable member and others stood up against that law and said, you know what, this is a dangerous, slippery slope we are going down. And we cannot just willy-nilly pass laws like this that are going to have massive effects over the long term, that could have very detrimental effects over the long term. So in summary, I just want to say that this member would never and did not say anything that was relating this government to the atrocities of Stalin. And it is despicable that this person has such a thin skin over there that he would be willing to make that accusation against a member that has clearly demonstrated with his work that he cares very much about peoples that have undergone those atrocities. He speaks about it regularly. He feels passionately about it, as passionate about it as anyone else. And I would ask that member take his remarks back and apologize to this member for insinuating such absolute stupidity, because that's what it was. It was a stupid comment.
Honourable Member, we should not use language on each other personal. I have to make a decision here. I will wait for the blues so I have enough information to make a ruling on this. So that's a point of order that the Honourable Minister of Education raised. I also noticed Honourable Minister of Finance did stand up On
Mr. Speaker, understanding orders which the under 11.1, Mr. Speaker, I want to make sure that the member has the opportunity to withdraw the comment that he said that was clear on this side. He used the term scumbucket, Mr. Speaker, and if he doesn't want to acknowledge it, that's fine. He has the opportunity to stand up in this House and withdraw that comment from the floor, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Edmund Gowrie Glenmore, on the point of order.
Well, we'll wait to see it's in the answered, but the fact is that people should behave honourable. If they want to behave in a manner that is described only in poor language, those are sometimes the consequences. And I don't know that I said anything out in answered, Mr. Chair. I was responding to him personally on the disgusting language that he was saying and the accusations that he was making. And to honor? No, it's the way you're behaving. Yes, so quit behaving that way. Why don't you behave honourable? Then maybe you would be treated that way.
Honourable member, you have made your point. Since other honourable member heard the word, and I heard it too. So please stand up and withdraw that word.
If the chair would like to be withdrawn, I will withdraw it.
Now we will go back to the amendment A1. Honourable member for Gowrie Glenmore on your amendment A1.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a sensitive subject. I can understand why many people are getting somewhat riled up about it. I would like to comment, first of all, I guess, on the Deputy Premier at the function on Monday. In his speech, he talked about government taking the property of those individuals and not fairly compensating it for it. Those were the words of the government member, which I totally agree with. But to realize that in Bill 36 and Bill 19, that's the exact same wording that was in there, is not fairly or properly compensating them for the taking of property. And that's what this issue is about. And because we have some members here that want to try and act like they wouldn't ever do that, when in fact they passed legislation, is truly disgusting. And what they had to say is even more disgusting, Mr. Chair. And the honourable member should leave the House and go out and cool out a little bit and see if he can get his thoughts back together. But I'd like to make the amendment to move on Bill 23, Amendment A1, the Land Assembly Project Area Amendment Act 27, be amended in the preamble in the 5th recital by replacing appropriately compensated for their lands with fully compensated for their losses. And this is, again, a critical point, which it's obvious that members over there don't understand. And they sit there and want to say that they're honourable, you can trust us. And every tyrannical leader that's ever raised up its ugly head to commit such atrocities to human kind of always started on that good first step that, oh, we're looking after the people as a whole, but yet they don't respect the most critical starting point is property rights. And that's what they do, is they don't respect the property rights, and they say we don't need to fairly compensate them. And they go forward for there, and then they say such things as unbelievable. It truly is unbelievable, Mr. Chair. And in the preamble, it says appropriately compensated for their lands. What does appropriately mean when you're compensating someone for their lands? And this government and its members have said many, many times, if we go back through Hansard, is to say, oh, we'll be fair. I mean, that was the whole basis, Mr. Chair, of their royalty review, was this word fair. They wouldn't even respect the rule of law and the contracts that had been signed by those companies and individuals, that they get to make this cabinet decision. And it's wrong. And so what we want to see in this bill, to ensure that it really is what they're saying it is to be fully compensated for their losses. And that is in itself critical, because in the preamble it says appropriately compensated for their lands. But lands have opportunities. And there's losses if you can't use that land in a way that is the best economic possibility for you. And I understand, and we all understand zoning. We're not going to say that you can build some nuclear reactor on that piece of property because it's my right. No, there's zoning, there's industrial, there's all of those areas, and they jump to these conclusions to seem to think that because you want to be fully...
Honourable or any other honourable member wishing to speak on A1? Amendment A1, Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Yes, certainly, Mr. Chairman. I can understand why the Honourable Member has put this amendment, as you refer to it as A1, before the Assembly. Certainly, compensation and what's considered fair compensation has been an issue of significant concern in the public meetings that I have attended around this land assembly project area. And I'm just going to note that, Mr. Chairman, but certainly this amendment should be given due consideration by this Assembly. I can understand where the Honourable Member from Calgary-Glenmore is coming from on this. I know the concern that landowners have with this government's initiative here. When we look at the controversy that has surrounded this legislation and this Amendment Act, of course we all know, Mr. Chairman, this is the second time we have been amending this legislation. I think within a year. I may be 12 months or 13 months, but there has been still many outstanding questions presented at public meetings by concerned landowners. And the right to compensation and legal recourse, equal to rights under expropriation, are important. And the questions that are asked by landowners, again, are significant. The member here is anticipating that landowners would be fully compensated for their losses. And there will be a discussion certainly around that. There will be a discussion on what is fair compensation, what is current market value. I can imagine where all this is going. But certainly Amendment A1 is of interest, and I would be considering supporting the amendment as it's been presented. I think it would improve this bill. And I think we should hear from other honourable members of this Assembly who may have more to add on this. Thank you.
On the amendment, Honourable Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak to the amendment and the bill in committee here. I'm very encouraged to hear language from the opposition with respect to this bill, and some of the language that was just said here in terms of them being very encouraged by the changes in the bill. I believe the honourable member also said he would agree that that these changes are a benefit, and he said we are grateful for the amendments. One thing I fail to understand a little bit, Mr. Chair, is I think that the lack of knowledge on the land planning restrictions on land. They like to say freezing of land, and I know the Honourable Minister of Agriculture asked the Honourable Member yesterday or 2 days ago if he could articulate the difference between a permitted or discretionary use in terms of land use and bylaw planning in municipalities, and he didn't know the answer for that. I'm also confused by the fact that he refers to Section 10 with respect to sending notices and it's not Section 10 within the bill that speaks about sending notices to the registrar. It's Section 5 of the Act. And I noticed that the Honourable Member for Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo said the same thing last night or yesterday in second reading. So the Honourable Member from Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo, I believe, said we all know what it's like to deal with bankers, and for the most part we don't like it. I don't know why he's criticizing bankers so much. But he also says
Honourable Minister, we are talking about Amendment A1.
I'll get to that, Mr. Chair. The other thing I would just speak of as part of speaking to this amendment is the assertion that the opposition are the champions of property rights. And I remember very vividly when we were debating Bill 26 in this House, when this caucus supported a very significant change to landowner rights, and the Wildrose caucus was nowhere to be seen, in spite of commitments made by their leader. But with respect to the amendment, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank them for bringing forward ideas and possible solutions, just like all Albertans have done over the last many months. But clearly, through the Act, the way it's amended, the intent is to deal with the request from this opposition party and Albertans that landowners would be fully compensated, they would have full access to the courts, and clearly through the Act, in the legislative piece, not in the preamble, the Act points to the Expropriation Act and all the heads of compensation in the Expropriation Act. So there's not a big requirement to try and articulate those details so specifically through the preamble, which is just to put the bill in context. And my feeling, Mr. Speaker, is that when we leave the wording at appropriately compensated for their lands, it's very wide, it's very encompassing. Folks that are working on these deals, either through negotiation or using the heads of expropriation or going to expropriation or reverse expropriation, have a very wide range that they can use in terms of establishing what kind of compensation is there for landowners. And of course we want them to be fully compensated. But essentially what we're talking about is removing the word appropriately and putting the word in losses, compensated for losses. So I think we want to go beyond compensating people just for their losses and leave the people that need to negotiate or interpret this in the Land Compensation Board and the courts all the latitude possible through the access to the heads of compensation and the Expropriation Act and any kind of negotiations that may take place to make it appropriate and very fair and even generous for landowners.
Still think it's about property.
On the Amendment A1, Honourable Member for McMurray Wood Buffalo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the amendment pertaining to A1, Mr. Speaker, the member from Calgary Glenmore clearly has indicated what needs to be amended here. And the member from Athabasca Redwater had made some reference to this amendment, and interesting some points that he made, but I would caution government members and that member to guard against self-deception, because as I look here of the Athabasca advocate in terms of comments he had made relative to the situation, I find it interesting that people who are living in Athabasca right now who own a hotel that have invested money over the many, many years, and when I drive from Fort McMurray, and sometimes I move off of Highway 63 and actually because of its condition and actually drive to on Highway 2 through Athabasca, and speaking to folks at the coffee shop there, I find it interesting that if you own a hotel in Athabasca, you've invested your life savings, you invested your capital, but at this particular situation, they'll go ahead and give you the market value. And so what this ultimately means, based on what the member has said, is that too bad, so sad, relative to the issue of fair compensation and opportunity pertaining to that is lost. And so the opportunity lost is a real value when it comes to on a balance sheet. But it seems like this government does not believe that. So you can invest money in putting up a hotel that's sitting there for 20 years. This government comes in and they just plow through it. They expropriate your land. And by the way, you're not going to get any compensation or any value for the loss of your capital asset that has been there. And so I'll speak very slowly. I understand he was confused about what was being said. We are not confused. What we are certain of is they are confused relative to this mismatch of amendments that they had put forward that really has got it wrong from day one. And so, Mr. Chairman, I want to say to you that when I continue to drive, when I drive back to Fort McMurray this weekend, I'll be stopping in Athabasca again, and it's very interesting to say that the people in there, relative to their investment of capital on this amendment, we are looking for fully compensated for their losses. And this, what they have put forward, does not cover that. In other words, so sad, you know, too bad you invested it in Alberta or in Athabasca, but your life savings, they're just going to be lost because we're just going to compensate you for the actual market value, nothing to do with the loss and projected loss of the future. Now, so anyone who looks at financial statements, and I pride myself on my background in teaching this type of situation, I want to say to you that the real message to the government should be this. You got it wrong at the very beginning. Now you're getting it wrong again with amendments and amendments and amendments and amendments and amendments. You know, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, the bottom line is it's a bad piece of legislation. And so I can only say to you, Mr. Chairman, that this government should do the honourable thing and withdraw it. And rather than trying to jam through the kind of amendments and the type of things that have gone on here, they should be really looking at and guarding against self-deception. Because the fact is, what we have witnessed here, after a day and a half in session, then a 3-week holiday that this government gave themselves, then they came back, and now, what are they doing? In a 10-day period, trying to ram through pieces of legislation and amendments on something that they know they got wrong from day one. You know, it's often said, when you're digging a hole, you have two choices. Keep digging or stop digging. And clearly this government has not stopped digging on this issue, and they will pay the price at the next provincial election. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for on Amendment A1, Honourable Member for Edmonton, yes. Highlands, Norwood.
Yes, well, I just wanted to, since there's no 22(2)A, I just wanted to ask the Honourable Member if he could repeat his saying about ducks. As I got it, it's if it looks like a duck and it quacks, then it's bad legislation. Is that how it goes?
Mr. Speaker, that's a very, very good question. The reason I say that, I have a lot of experience with my 4-year-old son, who, you know, he actually likes ducks a lot. There's been rumors that we don't like ducks in Fort McMurray. Well, we love ducks in Fort McMurray. And I will say that, in fact, the honourable member occasionally brings in a duck into the house, and I'd ask him to bring in a duck if he had. Well, there you go. He has one right here, and all the power to him. But it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it means that it was legislation that actually was being driven through because of the fact that this government didn't listen to Albertans.
You're getting closer.
Minister of Infrastructure
on
you, Amendment A1.
Just a couple of questions for the honourable member from Lac-La-Biche, or I should say Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo. I'm a little confused as well because he wants us to throw out the legislation. Yet last night he said that Bill 23 does contain positive amendments. It allows landowners to trigger expropriation of their land. That's a positive. And I want to say that I was pleased to see that. And he goes on to actually say a few fairly positive things about the bill. And he says the amendment that's missing is with regard to Section 10 of the original bill. Well, the amendment they brought forward has nothing to do with Section 10, of course. But he did mention fair market. He did mention fair market, Mr. Chair. And I'm wondering if he can point to me in the bill anywhere that it says fair market.
Honourable Member for McMurray Wood Buffalo.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I really feel I empathise with the member, the fact that the confusion that he speaks of. But we are very clear in the Wild Rose. Number one, we believe that when an Albertan invests capital, such as a hotel or a business in his area, where they have for the last 25 years had a successful business, and then all of a sudden the big bad government comes in and takes over the property and says, we'll give you market value for what's going on. They do not recognize the actual opportunity cost and the loss of what this hardworking agriculture family, if they owned the business, would lose in the future. And this government is failing to recognize that, and that is fundamentally wrong.
Honourable Member for Edrie-Chestermere on Amendment A1.
On the Amendment A1. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendment is with regards to the preamble, of course, and I think it's a good amendment. I think that it's solid because it, we don't appropriately compensating landowners for expropriating their property or essentially expropriating the property is certainly it's very important, and it's very serious when they're not compensated fully for their losses. And I like the language used here because too often government speak means many different, means something very different to what it means to the average Albertan. And I think of the fixed election date debacle, for example, where you had, the Premier say, we're going to have fixed election dates, and then that turned into fixed election seasons. And to the average human being out there, they would say a fixed election date is the same thing that's basically defined in all the other legislation around the country. It should be clearly on a specific day every 4 years. So, but then of course we come out with these fixed election seasons. So the point is this kind of double speak or Tory speak, as it's sometimes called. It just frustrates people. So I think it's a very good amendment because this makes it very clear that whereas the government says we will appropriately compensate their lands, which appropriate, what does appropriate mean? Well, it depends what the government feels it means. Who knows what appropriate compensation means? It could depend from year to year, depending on who's sitting in the chair over at the Ministry of Infrastructure. So I think this is good to say fully compensated for the losses because it'll give Alberta landowners that knowledge that when their land is taken, and whether it's a business loss, whether it's any kind of loss, whether it's a loss of opportunity because their land was tied up so they couldn't move forward with a different project and so forth, that they will be fully compensated by the government for those losses. So anyway, I think it's a very good thought to put into the Act, and I will say that I do intend on supporting these amendments because it is an improvement clearly from the previous legislation. Getting back to what the Honourable Minister, who I have very high regard for, he said earlier that Section 10 wasn't in the bill. Well, unfortunately, that's what we're asking, or amending Section 10. Sorry, what isn't in this current bill before us? I would say that's why it's so important that he look at amending that portion. We would like to bring amendments to that effect, Mr. Chair, but apparently we're not permitted to do so because it's not in this Bill 23. So we can't amend something that isn't taken up in this amending bill. So that's why we're trying to urge the government to take the opportunity to bring forward a bill that will take into account that specific situation, which is that when banks are notified under Bill 9, under the Land Assembly Project Area Act, when they are notified of a person's property being frozen and so forth, then they have no basically that will affect their ability to use that land as collateral in different business ventures and so forth. So that's a very serious omission that has occurred. But as I said before, this Act is a vast improvement over what the original Land Assembly Act gave us. And I would note again, and I want to congratulate in particular this member from Calgary Glenmore, as well as Keith Wilson, who have been, as well as our Wild Rose and Caucus leader, Danielle Smith, for being ardent supporters of landowner rights and fighting tooth and nail from the very start.
Right.
Whether it was long before the three individuals other than the member from Calgary-Glenmore came to this party, they were out fighting tooth and nail for landowners and making sure that they got government's attention. And because of that, we have this Bill 23, which has is clearly a lot better than what was out there previously. So I'd like to thank them and thank those individuals, and I hope that there would be enough class on the other side. Well, at least certainly not from certain members over there, but certainly from this minister, to say, yeah, you know what, we were wrong, and we blew it, and that's what happens in life sometimes, and we're gonna make up for our mistake. If they would just say it, I think that it would gain a lot of people's respect, because they still seem to keep putting out there that we had to do this clarifying legislation because of all the lies and so forth that were being fed by other individuals, by Keith Wilson, by opposition parties and so forth, which is not true, because clearly if they were lies, they wouldn't be amending this legislation to make it clear and to make substantive changes as we see. So on the balance, Mr. Chair, I think that A1, Amendment A1, is a very appropriate amendment. That it makes the preamble brings the preamble a little bit more in line with what I hope is the intent of the bill, which is to make sure that landowners are fairly and fully compensated for the losses they incur when the government comes in and expropriates their land, which of course is the most serious, I think, one of the most serious of government interventions, other than perhaps putting somebody in jail, is the expropriation of land. When you put someone in jail, you're taking away virtually all of their liberty, and of course that's why we have a system in place to try to make sure, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, try to make sure that we only put those who absolutely are a menace to society in jail. The same, just below that is the expropriation of people's property. That's a very serious thing, especially since it's done not because of any bad thing that the individual or property owner did. And so when we do that, we have to make sure that they are absolutely fully compensated for the taking away of that property, in the interest of the public good. It does sometimes need to occur. We do need to build highways. We do need to build power lines and all these other things that the government has to do at times. But we should make sure that people are fully compensated for their losses, not just adequately, because what is adequate clearly has a very different meaning between this government over here and the opposition parties, and clearly between this government and between regular Albertans, as witnessed over the last 2 years of what has been a complete debacle with regards to the respect for property, upholding and respecting property rights in Alberta. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Not yet.
Honourable member for Calgary-Glenmore on A1.
Yes. And I'd like to start off with and thank the minister for getting up and sharing his concerns, and I hope to be able to answer a few of his answers, but also to make a few comments. He started off with a very profound word that has been used many, many times by this government, and that's the intent of the preamble. And yes, the intent is there, but the whole reason, Honourable Member, why we're doing these amendments, or why you've brought forward Bill 23, is because the intent wasn't clear enough in Bill 19, and so you've brought it forward. And so the intent is critical, but it's also, Mr. Chair, very important that we realize that with this Land Assembly Project Act, there's going to be those people that end up going to the court. And the courts always look at the preamble, because that sets the parameters on what they're going to look at. And so the preamble is critical when it comes to property rights, that it is right, because it sets the overall parameters. And so a judge, in our view, could look at this and basically state that, all we need to do is compensate them for their land. And the Expropriation Act, and the honourable member rightly points this out, says, well, no, the Expropriation Act allows for greater latitude. But the question is that latitude in Bill 23? And we're concerned we're not. It's a minor change. It doesn't jeopardize the government side at all. I think that it clears the intent on what is actually happening there. And so I'll personally be shocked, Mr. Chair, if they don't accept this friendly amendment to a bill. And as he has pointed out, that we have praised them for coming forward and making these three major improvements in the bill. One, that we can trigger expropriations. Two, that they can they've restored access to the courts. And three, that landowners can sell their land beyond the market value, which is in this amendment. And those are great steps forward. But the whole purpose of this amendment is to ensure that intent, and what we're trying to clarify here, is set out in the preamble of this bill. Because the preamble such that says appropriately compensated for their lands does not cover the entire area that this government seems to say that this is what we want to do with the bill. This is where we're trying to cover it. But again, he's brought up that, we referred to Section 10, and again, the dilemma that we're in here is that we can only speak on the bill that's in front of us, which is an amendment to a bill. And in that bill, and again, because the government has been bringing these bills forward so fast and going late at night, I'll be the first to confess I haven't gone through them nearly as well as I would like to. But this government doesn't think that it's important to go through these bills in any detail. They're experts. And that's why we're here doing these amendments, because of their expertise in sticking their foot in their mouth and doing it wrong. Their expertise at somehow looking past the rule of law and saying that's not important, that Cabinet will do it. And their expertise in saying that, you know what, our intent is good, trust us. That's what they're experts at, Mr. Chair, is invoking this talk of trust us, trust us. And it's not good enough. They cannot be trusted. And so we need the time to go through these bills with a fine-tooth comb and try and make sure that it's right. Because when are they going to come back and bring the amendment to Bill 19, which really needs to be done? And again, I believe it's Section 10, where it refers to all those with interest in the land. And then you revert to Section 5, where the honourable member is talking about such things as banks and those who own mortgages or interested in those land. But we can't make any amendments because that's not in this bill. And so it's fine to say, well, let's put the amendments through, which we will agree to. But let's make sure that the intent is fully covered in here, which it's not. The honourable member even said that, that we're going to allow the Expropriation Act, which does allow for unforeseen or let's say unacquired losses yet for that opportunity, the opportunity loss, which we see all the time, especially in a society so fast-growing and paced at what we have here. But also want to say that, property rights are paramount. And they seem to mock me on talking about that, how important property rights are, and they're paramount. And because the property rights are where the rule of law grows from. I mean, back in June of 1215, is when the Magna Carta was originally written down and signed by the king, and the essence of that whole fight for freedom was the respect of property rights. Are they going to be entrenched? And that was a turning point in what I want to call Western civilization, where property rights were entrenched and they were protected, and you couldn't just go kill somebody and then seize their property anymore because it was recognized that they had ownership. And that's what this is all about, is ownership. I mean, Mr. Chair, our coat of arms is Fortis et Liber. And we can ask ourselves, what is Liber? And I don't imagine that they even know what Liber is. I hear the education... Well, you can. I'm no expert on Latin, but I've had many people say that it's liber. But what you have is the inner bark of a tree. If you look up the Latin dictionary and what it is, and what correlation does that have to do with freedom, I don't think there's any members over there that have any idea what it is. And I should probably sit down and let them answer, because that's what they like to do to us, is say, oh, what is this? And maybe I will. I'll sit down and I'll ask them, what's the correlation between the Latin word liber and property rights, and see if any of them have the so-called knowledge of what that is.
On Amendment A1, any other honourable member wishing to speak on Amendment A1? Seeing none, the Chair shall now call the question. Those in favour with Amendment A1, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. No. The Amendment A1 is defeated. We'll go back to the bill. Other member for Calgary-Glenmore on the bill.
Well, on the bill. And again, so now we're back to Bill 23, the Land Assembly Project Area Amendment Act 2011. Not surprised, and so not being surprised, shouldn't be disappointed that this government and their members do not know what freedom is, and they can have that assignment to go home and look that up. But I'll share a little bit about it. Liber is the inner bark of a tree, and the reason why we go back to that is that under the early law, that they had to write down the ownership. And where do they write it down on? They write it down the inner bark of a tree. That was their paper, and that was their designation for ownership. And whether that was ownership of slaves, whether it was ownership of property, that was the book that they kept. And that's the root word for it. And it also is in library, and it's in libro for the Spanish definition for book. And that's where it goes back to. And so when it comes to rule of law and writing down and owning property, it's critical, Mr. Chair, that we get it right. And this bill has made some very good improvements, which we will be voting in favour of. But Amendment A1 would have cleared up the intent and the preamble to a much better degree if we would have looked at that. And it's, like I say, Mr. Chair, it's very disappointing that these government members do not understand the importance of the rule of court. They're merely putting these amendments in there because of the pressure that they've been feeling, and it's always disappointing when governments or individuals act because they're pressured into doing something rather than believing in doing what it is because they know it's right, setting the example and protecting those properties. There's no question that this government does not have that respect for the rule of law. They don't have that respect for property. But what they do have respect of is the voters out there, and realize every now and then there's this check that's on them, that if people are upset, they don't have to vote for them. And as they've pointed out with their other bills, Mr. Chair, that they're going to set a season when there's an election coming up. And because of that, there's certain areas where they've upset property owners and those in rural Alberta where they say, oh, we don't have a choice here. We need to actually pass these amendments in order to ensure that we have support in the next election. And so I'm proud to represent property owners throughout the province. I'm proud to fight the good fight for freedom, for property rights. I think that it's critical that we continue that fight because there's other bills. Bill 50, which I spoke on earlier today in question period, is not in the best interest of Albertans. And if this government truly understood property rights and understood the process of law and the rule of law, we would have other amendments coming in for Bill 50 and Bill 36. But instead all we have, Mr. Chair, is a task force that's going to be brought forward. We have a premier who says, oh, what we're going to do is review it. We'll scrap all of the critical infrastructure that we previously said were critical, which we know they're not. but yet this government wants to continue that cloud of misinformation that, oh, these are criticals, we need to do it. It's interesting. I've heard that a lawsuit has actually been brought forward today on the Heartland line, which I wish the people good luck on that, to stop that line, and that we need to go back to a proper review. But this government truly doesn't understand the need. That they're being pushed into a corner. They're responding in a positive way because they're forced into it. But yet there are no bills being brought forward on Bill 50, which is going to cost taxpayers billions of dollars. The energy minister, when he got up today, again he says, oh, we don't know what we're talking about on the overrun of the expenses from what AESO has told those two companies that they can do. Mr. Chair, Bill 23 is just one step of many steps that really need to be addressed by this government, but yet they're failing to address them. And we would sure like to see them to take a couple of steps forward. The honourable member from Airdrie-Chestermere, he talked a little bit about the penalties and the fact that this government made the amendment, which we are grateful for, to say that, if you refuse to go along with the government, they're going to put them for 2 years in jail for fighting for your property rights. And then they sit over there and say, oh no, we understand that, oh no, we would never do anything to hurt the landowner or our citizens. But yet it's very clear with these amendments that they're very problematic, and we need to do something about it. We are disappointed, like I say, that this bill doesn't have the context of all of Bill 19. There's only amendments, and so when it comes to notification of people with interest in that land, that letter is going to go out to the banks. And I don't know, Honourable Minister, how you're going to address that or acknowledge that, but it's not in this amendment. And so how are we to amend Bill 19 when you don't bring all that forward? And so that's one of the arguments on why we say, well, it should just be scrapped and start over. But you are going a long ways forward. We're appreciative of the distance that you've gone here on Bill 23. And like I say, restoring access to the courts is critical, and Albertans are grateful for that. They're grateful that you are striking out the heavy hand of the threats of putting people in jail for wanting to fight and try and keep their property or to be fully or fairly compensated. And again, you've got in here to sell their land beyond just the market value, which is a huge step forward, which again is good. But the problem and the root of the problem is that you don't seem to show that respect for the rule of law and property rights. And by voting down that amendment, I don't understand it. What could possibly be harmful to the government or the taxpayers of this province by fully compensating someone for their losses? And it's a critical point that the difference between losses or their land, your opportunities or your day is huge. And we just feel that by not taking that amendment, that the intent, which you speak so eloquently about, has to be questioned. We very much want to ensure property rights. We want to ensure those property owners that they'll be fully compensated. It's very easy, and again, this has been a long, drawn-out process, that when land is frozen underneath or frozen for future development, it really undermines people's opportunities. And it's not always easy to move and to go to a new direction and say that, you don't need to worry about it. We're freezing your land, but it won't have an impact on you when it has a major impact. And we would sure like to see those changes made, to recognize fully that they'll be compensated for all their losses, not just for their land. And it's kind of what I want to call a silent freeze to say that, well, we'll fully compensate you for your land, when in fact they had a business that they were going to build there. You know, we hear all the time when it comes to land, it's location, location, location. And so if someone happens to have a great location and they're wanting to build, maybe it's a golf course, and they're got that opportunity there, they got investors, then the government in its wisdom realizes that, well, this valley really needs to be flooded, we need to put up a dam. Do they lose that economic opportunity? And it's tough to ensure that that economic opportunity is going to be realized anywhere other than the courts, that they can bring their cases forward, they can debate it or present it to a judge, and hopefully be able to be fully compensated, and not just so say, well, that land is only good for grazing, when in fact it has many opportunities to be upgraded. And we just really have concerns, Albertans have concerns, that we want it to be a quick, easy process, that people can go forward and be compensated properly. And this bill goes a good ways down there, but we'd sure wish that you would have accepted our amendment on the preamble to really say that your intent is what you say it is, and we want to compensate for all losses and full market value, not merely just for the price of your land which you have there. But with that, I'll step down and see if there's anybody else that wants to address this bill.
On the bill,